today, let me tell you, leadership is a fight. I don't know whether you notice that. If you're a leader or even observed leaders, they all look, it looks like they're constantly in a fight because, well, leadership is a fight. And so today we're going to be looking at how different leaders are fighting different battles, and some are fighting with each other. Yes, we're going to be talking about Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and their many fights, literal and metaphorical fights. We're talking about Tucker Carlson. He had an interview with Russell Brand. We were chatting about him. Patrick Davies talks about ESG. That's actually going to be an exciting one that we're going to be talking about. ESG, the ESG scores, and really interested to see hear what Dr. Rod has to say about that. Banks are closing Christians' accounts. We're going to talk about that and how it can affect you as a leader and what you need to do to protect yourself. And we're going to be looking at the Last Supper and how Jesus spoke about how leaders should fight. But before I go any further, let me welcome Dr. Rod St. Hill. Dr. Rod, welcome.
G'day, Craig. As always, it's fantastic to be with you.
It's always good to have you. Now, if I look a little distracted today, yeah, you're right. Yash is not with us. Yash is normally pressing all the buttons and moving us around and making us look good in the background. But today, it's my responsibility to make sure we all look good. So I'm going to be switching buttons and everything like that. So not all the fancy stuff that Yash always puts out, but we'll get there. We'll get there. The basics will do. Bear with us. Dr. Rod. So let me get this going. The billionaire brawl. Now, who's winning the fight between Musk and Zucks? So, I don't know whether you've heard much about this, but there's a bit of a feud going on. A feud between Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, and Elon Musk, the CEO of everything, pretty much. But mainly today, he's going to be standing in the position of CEO of Twitter. Now, he's obviously made this big, bold move into social media, wanting to turn it all around, make it fight for safe speech and freedom of speech and all those sorts of things. So he's doing that battle right now. And then recently, he challenged Zucks to a cage fight. I know, mature. We'll talk about that in a moment with Dr. Rod. But just last week, Zucks released, or Meta released Threads. Threads being the Instagram or Meta response to Twitter. It's meant to be this text-based, basically. It's just a copy of Twitter, and it's an extension of Instagram, but it's the same team, but it's a different app. So they're having this battle that for Twitter and in Threads and everything like that. And they're kind of going back and forwards, and it got to a low point of Musk challenging Zucks to an appendage measuring contest, right? Which is just a little bit low blow, literally and metaphorically. Now, there's this battle between it's not just, I don't know, this low blow, as they say, this low blow against Mark Zuckerberg, where Musk actually added a ruler emoji and calling Mark Zuckerberg, Zuck is a cuck. Now, that's actually a bit of a derogatory term, and saying someone that is pretty much in control. Now, Dr. Rod, let me bring this to you. these two seemingly the biggest leaders, let's be honest, in business right now, the biggest leaders, I would say, some of the biggest companies, and they're having this bit of a, I don't know, schoolyard spat, like fight. It's a little comical. Obviously, Elon Musk is a little bit trolling, and that's just his personality. What do you take from a leadership? Like, let's not even get into the actual issues that's happening. Let's first talk about just the way that they're responding to anyone. Is this just a little bit of fun, or is this unprofessional?
Look, abstracting from the actual words that have been flying to and fro, I think more than anything, this is about marketing, really. Look, Elon Musk bought Twitter for over $40 billion, and it's probably worth about half that.
Yeah.
If it was to be sold today. So he's got a big problem. He's got to recoup his investment. And he knows that one of the ways in which he needs to do that is to make Twitter more attractive. Now, in part, of course, he's done that by giving some assurance that people who are more to the right politically, or who are more conservative in terms of their social values and ethical position and so on, he's given them some assurance that they won't be thrown off the platform.
Yeah.
My understanding is that nevertheless, the number of people using Twitter is actually falling. And I'm sure that he was concerned when, well, the world learnt that streams broke the record for cracking the 100 million user mark.
Yep.
They managed to do that in 5 days.
Yeah,
that's
5
right.
days, yeah.
And look, the closest record to that was, it took some years, I think. I was checking.
I think it was about a year, just over a year or something like that.
So it's a much longer period of time.
Yeah.
So look, streams has been spectacularly successful. Streams, oh my goodness.
Sorry, it's only new. It's fine.
Threads. I even wrote it down on a piece of paper so I wouldn't get it wrong. Threads has been spectacularly successful in terms of support from users. There's no doubt about that.
Uptake,
and obviously,
yes.
it's a direct threat to Elon Musk's Twitter.
But is it?
Oh, look, well, I'm not a marketing expert. You know more about that than I do, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if people have migrated from Twitter onto Threads in the early days. I guess we'll find that out. Analysts will look at that in time to come. But look, I think this ongoing spat between them, it's probably motivated by marketing more than anything else, because they're getting plenty of publicity from it. Musk is getting plenty of publicity. Look, if there's anyone on the planet who doesn't know that Elon Musk now owns Twitter, you know, they've really been hiding somewhere with their fingers in their ears and their hands over their eyes, if it can do both at the same time. So, look, both of these guys are pretty smart guys. They're intelligent. They know how to get free publicity. I'd be quite surprised if there's a lot of personal animosity between the two, although there are whispers of court cases. But look, Samsung and Apple have been in the courts virtually continuously for more than a decade. And it's all about use of technology. And I see Elon Musk has accused Threads of stealing his proprietary models and all that sort of thing. And it wouldn't surprise me if we wind up in court over this as well. But look, I think fundamentally this is about publicity. It's about marketing as much as anything. And that's not necessarily bad from a leadership perspective, because they're getting all of this publicity and they're not having to pay for it.
Well, yeah, it comes down to the outcome, doesn't it? Like
it does.
We as leaders need to know what our outcome is. What's the purpose? You know, at the moment, they're both actually leading quite, how do I say, failing companies with as much as you could call a $100 whatever billion-dollar companies they are that they run, failures. But Twitter has obviously gone through a regression recently. Meta has gone through massive losses in ad revenue and in share price and all that. Like they've had their challenges, and they know that they're on the back foot. And so I think you're right. Like this marketing approach, I think that the fact that they're not just leaving this up to a marketing department to come out with some beer with a transgender person on, trying to get, like they're the CEOs that are just jumping up and going, we're at the forefront of this. We're going to lead from the front, and we're going to get some eyeballs on what we're doing. So I think that's right.
They're able to do this because they've got very high profiles. They've had a lot of exposure in the media over a long period of time, actually. So they're well known, and a so-called spat between them is going to be reported on, not only in social media but elsewhere as well. So they have the awareness of the market to be able to do this, and I think it's quite a smart thing to do. Just forget about the words they're using and all of these kinds of things, but just in terms of the approach, I think it's quite smart, actually. And look, the other thing is, as leaders, as business leaders, both of them are facing what all entrepreneurs and business leaders face at some time or other. Their product is maturing.
Yes.
Right? Digital media has now been around for a few years, more than 10 years, I think.
Yeah.
And there are now, Meta no longer has a monopoly or a near monopoly. Mm-hmm. So there's now a little bit of competition coming in. And we've seen how each of the digital platforms has had to make adjustments to try to capture more of a market which isn't growing as fast as it used to, because these products are past their early phases of market development. So these entrepreneurs are now facing a maturing market, and that's when marketing really does have to kick in to keep your market share up. So I think both of these guys are very smart guys, and they know exactly what they're doing, and as leaders, what they're doing is taking every opportunity to market their product without having to pay for the marketing.
So, advice for leaders. Let's bring this back to the everyday leader that's not leading a $100 billion company. Now, multiple. I don't even know what I saw a graph. There is a graph somewhere. Should we start a fight with our competitor down the road just to get attention?
Oh, you got to think it through very, very carefully, because this is what we economists call it's a game, a so-called prisoner's dilemma. You've really got to figure out how your competitor is going to react, because it might not end well. So there's risk. There's certainly risk. And look, if you're a fairly small operator, I would say you really do need to consider the risk, because the consequences of the whole thing backfiring on your business are catastrophic if you're only a small business.
Yeah, so I think for what I can see for this is what leaders can take away is as leaders, through what we can learn from the Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg battle between each other, is I think the first thing is the fact that this is their character and it's been ongoing. Elon Musk is a bit of a troll on Twitter, that he always has been, even before he owned Twitter. Mark Zuckerberg has always been a little bit awkward, but a little bit weird, but actually quite confident in his attacks and responses and everything like that. So it's actually, what they're doing is in normal character of what they're doing. And so I suppose what we can learn as leaders is don't try to emulate. I wouldn't go out and like, well, now I need to try to, fabricate some spat to get some coverage. No. It's just an extension of who they are. They do this all day, every day. This is not about just doing this for a special occasion to try to go viral or try to get some extra attention. It's the fact that you should be in this as a leader, as a business leader. You should be in this every day, rolling forward and challenging and constantly being out there and communicating with people and just always being on the forefront of everything, so that when you do have a time where there is a challenge where your business is going backwards or whatever, you're not having to reinvent yourself. You're not having to try to start new practices. This is just something that they're always doing. So be the spokesperson for your business. Be the spokesperson for your industry. Stand up for things that you want. Be vocal on the things that you believe God has called you to be vocal on. And then when the time comes, it'll just be normal behavior for you, and you can probably just turn the dial up a little bit rather than having to try to crank the engine from the beginning. Dr. Rod, do you have anything else to share about this fight? Actually, I do want to actually ask you one other thing. Obviously, we spoke about this, it being a marketing ploy. Them having this proposed cage fight that now Dana White is supposedly being a part of, which why wouldn't he be? Because this would be the biggest match of the century, pretty much. Once again, this is obviously publicity, good publicity, but what do you think? There's been arguments that, no matter what happens out of this, Musk is going to lose, because if Musk wins, he's twice the size of Zuckerberg and he'll just look like a bully. And if he loses to Zuckerberg, right?
Yeah.
So I don't what's this whole thing of I don't know. What's your take on a leader stepping outside of what he's meant to be doing and doing, let's call it celebrity boxing?
The risk, of course, is that you'll have to go in, both of them will have to go in the cage. And I doubt that really is what either of them want. These guys are smart guys, I think. They're taking calculated risks in terms of publicity.
Yeah.
I don't think either of them really wants to go in a cage and fight, literally fight physically, because I think, both of them have got too much to lose. I mean, once that happens, I think they'll start to look a bit silly.
Yeah. I was just going to ask you, because you mentioned about risk and they got too much to lose. Let me ask you, from a board perspective, right? These are guys that aren't just token CEOs. They are the head, the face, they are the company, pretty much. Without that person, the company just wouldn't be the same. So how would you, as a board member, how do you even okay something because what happens if one of them gets knocked out and then seriously injured and then, there's all these practical risks. What would you, how would you advise this sort of thing when it, from a board perspective to a CEO?
Well, whatever you do in terms of marketing should be in the marketing strategy. And a CEO should be pretty careful about going outside the agreed strategy. I think these two guys are different. Now, Elon Musk himself, I don't think he's entering to a board. He's the owner of Twitter, right? He owns Twitter. So he doesn't really have a board to answer to. But Zuckerberg, I believe, does. I have no idea what his board thinks. But I've had 30 years experience in governance. I'd be a bit worried unless it was an agreed strategy.
So what about CEOs or leaders of organizations that have, let's say, risky hobbies, right? Maybe they like motocross, or maybe they like, I don't know, skydiving, or I don't know, like anything like that. What's your advice as a board member to a business leader, a CEO, or someone
Sure. Look,
likes risky behavior?
Look, that kind of risky behaviour, I'd be a bit reluctant to try and stop someone from doing it. But a board should have what they call key man or key person risk insurance. So you should have an insurance policy on your CEO. Once you get to a certain size, I would recommend it. And the other thing is, if the death or injury or even sickness of the CEO is likely to impact significantly on the financial status of a company, you need to include that in your risk analysis. So a board needs to determine its appetite for risk. You need to identify the risk. Is the risk of injury high, medium, or low? Are the consequences of injury high, medium, or low? And ascertain what strategies you might put in place to mitigate or manage that risk. And having key person insurance would be one way of managing the risk. But honestly, if I had a CEO, I've got a CEO who likes to go spearfishing. Well, he could be eaten by a shark, but I don't feel that I want to stop him from spearfishing, because it obviously has significant benefits to him in terms of his well-being and his health, because he enjoys spearfishing, And I think I might have put an order in for a fish too. But so look, personally, I think we need to be aware of whatever risky activities are being undertaken. But it's not just the activities, it's the consequences for the business. And then you need to think about, well, what can we do to deal with that risk? But yeah, I'd be pretty reluctant to say to a CEO, sorry, you're not allowed to go skydiving, or you can't jump in a racing car on the weekend or anything like that.
Yeah, because it kind of goes against, you're asking that person not to be the person who they are.
Well, absolutely. I mean, entrepreneurship is all about taking risks. So
yes,
if you've got a CEO, or if you are yourself entrepreneurial, you're probably going to take some risks in other areas of your life. So you might go hang gliding or rock climbing or spearfishing or deep sea diving, because by nature you're somebody who's comfortable with taking risks.
And that risk in that, like, outside business activities does actually impact the business in a positive way, because, well, number one, they're getting their outlet. Number two, it might cause them to, let's say you mentioned rock climbing. It teaches them how to make quick decisions, how to, they're working on those parts of their brain that when they're in the business, then they're performing better because they've done that risky activity outside. So there are benefits, but I think that, and also you can't ask someone not to be. It's kind of like when Conor McGregor gets in trouble for hitting someone or whatever, and I'm like, you can't expect someone to be a beast in and from 9 to 5 and then turn off that beast outside of hours. Like, they are that beast because they are a beast, right? And I mean that in the best possible way, not bad, but risk people that take risk, the reason why your CEO is as good as he is because he takes risk. If you try to muzzle him or chain him or put him on a leash, it's gonna cripple his ability to do what he does well. That's my thoughts anyway. So, talking about fights, there is another fight that has been going on, which is the fight over Tucker Carlson. Now, this is actually a great interview, Dr. Rod, that you shared with me the other day. It had been on my watch list for a while. I finally got around to watching it. And there was so much in this. And guys, the link is down below. Russell Brand interviewed Tucker Carlson for like an hour or so. It was a great interview. I thought that there was a lot of really good things in it. But I was just trying to think, there's what out of that thing could I take as a lesson? Because there was lots of lessons that I learned, but I wanted to share this one line that he shared when we talk about fights, right? And we in leadership are constantly in a battle. We are always fighting. Now, one leader that is under the spotlight for the fight is Donald Trump. And it's really interesting when Russell Brand asked Tucker Carlson about Trump and what happened on January 6th at Capitol Hill. It was interesting that Tucker spoke very fondly of Trump, but then said this one statement: leaders shouldn't make people more angry. I'm censoring it because he says he didn't say a bad word, but let's just censor it for now. So I thought it was a really interesting take that he wasn't saying. Actually, his response to a lot of the questions are amazing. As always, the links are down in the description of all these articles. Go and watch it, etc. But Dr. Rod, his response to a lot of things was actually quite mature, I found. And this one where he was talking about January 6th, he kind of was very open to the fact that it wasn't Trump's fault, right? He was kind of like, look, it's not Trump's fault. However, as a leader, you shouldn't make people more riled up. And I just thought that's such a, like Jesus speaks about we need to be peacemakers, right? Like we as leaders, it's our responsibility to be peacemakers. And that's definitely not what Trump did on January 6th, although he didn't, I don't think he instigated it, but he didn't help it. And I thought it was a really interesting take that leaders shouldn't make people more angry. So when we're in fights, when we're in battles as leaders, we really shouldn't be trying to rile things up. We shouldn't be stoking the fire. We shouldn't look. I'll be completely honest. Like, I was late to our meeting this morning, or to this podcast today with you, Dr. Robbins. I was having a fight with my wife, right? And I must admit, I did exactly, now walking straight into this meeting, I did exactly what Tucker said not to do. You shouldn't make people more angry. I went into the conversation to poke. I wanted to emphasize a point, but while I was there, I poked a little bit and sparked a reaction, which I shouldn't have. And I immediately apologized and said, look, it wasn't the right approach. The facts are still the same, but I shouldn't have approached it in that way. And so, Dr. Rod, we as leaders are constantly in battles against competitors. There's battles in our teams within each other, like battles between our team and ourselves, but battles between our, fights between our team and other team members. How do we make sure that we don't contribute to the problem?
Oh, well, think before you speak. I think good leaders are always looking a bit down the track to try to figure out how their words, their actions are likely to impact the situation or the people involved. And look, I think President Trump did some pretty good things when he was in office. And, lists have been published. You can go online and find the lists of policies that he implemented. He was one of the very few presidents who actually did what he said he was going to do once he got in office, and you don't see that happen very often. And he obviously supported rather conservative approaches to many policy issues, which obviously a lot of people applauded. But he did have a weakness, I think, in that he didn't always think carefully about the consequences of what he might say. And I know, I'm not sure whether I've shared this with you on the podcast before, but in relation to things like January 6 was related to his statements about being robbed, that is, the election was stolen, and he was practically quoting from Hillary Clinton just a few years before. But that aside, he could have taken a different approach. He could have taken an approach. He could, for example, have set up an inquiry that could not have been shut down by the Biden administration to test the claims that were made. Now, look, I happen to believe that at the very least, there were statistical issues that ought to have been looked at. In other words, the statistics, particularly on voting patterns of people who were voting on the day and what was happening with mail-in votes and so on. There are enough statistical differences.
Anomalies.
or anomalies, if you want to call them that I think warrant some investigation without making any particular accusations.
Yeah.
But look, honestly, the American voting system is open to all kinds of abuse. It's when you consider that, America is supposedly leader of the free world and innovative and so on, their systems of voting are archaic.
Yes.
And they're all over the place. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because it's all state-based and different states do it different ways, have different rules and all sorts of things. You don't need to, or at least in that election, you didn't need identification. It's just ridiculous. We do have some of those same issues here in Australia too, where you don't have to prove you are who you say you are when you go to vote, and I think you should have to do that. But anyway, that all that aside, I think instead of taking what I would consider a wise and statesman-like approach, he tended to, as it were, shoot from the hip. So he said a lot of things and I doubt that he considered the consequences. I don't think he intended to start the unrest. I don't think he intended what his words appear to have generated. I don't think he intended that. And of course, he tried to stop it. And then the reason why Tucker Carlson was asked about January 6, of course, was that he showed footage that apparently had been suppressed by the congressional committee that was looking into the January 6 incidents. They called it an insurrection, which is probably a misuse of the English language. Well, I think it is anyway. But anyway, who cares what I think? But the general lesson here is our words can stoke anger, and anger rarely leads to a good outcome. I think that's the important lesson.
Yeah,
anger rarely leads to a good outcome. So don't stir it up. And in any case, anger is not good for us as individuals. It doesn't do us any good. It sends us to an early grave.
And
so
also,
let's not get angry.
We need to be careful of our words and choose our words and know that they have an outcome. And we need to be peacemakers. But also, kind of what we spoke about last week about the perception that even if it was the CIA or the FBI or whoever it is they're saying that were like had plants in there, the secret agents that were actually instigating it and that led it, and it was all pre-planned, all that sort of stuff. Like okay, let's say that it had nothing to do with Trump. Let's pretend. He said that, and he automatically then just put himself up to be blamed for it. But if he had have not said anything, then there's like that if we choose our words wisely, then we can't be held, our words can't be used against, well, there is less chance of our words being used against us. There's always a chance of our words being used against us. But how, it's a fine line, Dr. Rod, and we talk about this a lot. We talk about this challenge of standing up for what we believe. Like God has called us, God called us individually to different causes to stand up for. And so we need to know what we've been called to stand up for. But how do we know then, how do we stand up for something that Trump, like, because let's be honest, Trump believed that he was called to, what was the word? Expose,
drain the swamp. Drain the swamp.
That's it. Drain the swamp. And well, by him, kind of calling out this voter fraud, that was, like you say, there's issues that, like, yes, there was inconsistencies, but there have been, like, every time, and every single time you can see that there's been some form of impression of foul play or whatever in the voting or whatever. There's always, like, from one side or the other, both sides are guilty of it. But when we are standing up for what we're meant to be called, what we believe we're called for, how do we do that without inciting anger?
Well, look, I think you ought to be passionate about your purpose, passionate about what you believe, but I don't think passion is the same thing as anger.
Yeah.
Look, let me try and explain it this way. I have passion about values, attitudes, beliefs, ideas, methods, plans, strategies, those kinds of things. Anger is directed at people.
Yeah.
I think one of the major difference is anger usually is focused on an object, and usually that object is a person or a group.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Regrettably, we're seeing a lot of that in politics today, and I just don't think it's a good way to go. We've got to have passion as leaders, because if we don't, we won't feel like getting out of bed. Mm-hmm. Like both of us, when we were talking prior to this podcast, neither of us had more than 2 hours sleep last night, right? But we had passion about certain things that got us up out of bed.
Yeah.
And we're still going. Both of us will probably still be going by midnight tonight, because we both have pretty busy schedules today. That's just the way it is.
I still have a full days of work to do.
So you got to have passion, because that gives you motivation and drive. And obviously we need also to manage ourselves. We can't work 14, 16, 18, 20-hour days on a regular basis, but sometimes you have to, and it's the passion that you have for your purpose and your values, attitudes, beliefs and plans and all those things. That's what keeps you going. You have to have that. Otherwise, you'll never be able to sustain your leadership. But that isn't the same thing as anger. Now, unfortunately, you've also got to educate the people around you that your passion isn't the same thing as anger. It becomes anger when you start pointing your finger at people and using words like, you don't understand, or you don't work hard enough, or you need to get in behind this vision.
Yeah.
So you need to remove that kind of language as much as possible as a leader.
So I agree with you, but then my mind goes to, there are some causes that make me angry. Like, so for example, when I hear someone share the story of them being used and abused and treated poorly by and experiencing poor leadership, which kind of goes to your point a little bit, because like we always say, we're on a mission to eradicate poor leadership, but that is actually more based on poor leadership as the behavior, not as the person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've always emphasised that you don't want to get rid of the leaders. You want to get rid of poor leadership. So you're not trying to rid the world of poor leaders. You're trying to rid the world of poor leadership. So the focus actually comes off the person as, somebody who's created and loved by God, and the focus goes on to behaviours or attitudes or actions.
Yeah, because when someone shares with me that story, I get angry, and it really riles me up sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes it does when someone's actually been genuinely hurt. How would you differentiate that? Because I think, to your point, it's because it's about the situation, not about the person. I think that's one thing that I've trained myself to do is over time is I've understood that it's not the person, it's the behavior. And so I get righteously angry about a situation, but I used to be angry at the person about it.
Yeah, no, you should try to train. Well, I mean, I think we've got to train ourselves not to do that. But you see, in your case, your passion is to rid the world of poor leadership. And so the reason why you react in the way in which you do when you see examples of poor leadership or even abusive leadership, and we all know that happens, and both of us have experienced it as a matter of fact, that can generate this very, very strong emotion. And if you allow that anger to fester, sooner or later you will direct it at an individual.
Yeah.
So I think what as a leader, as yourself as a leader, what you need to recognise is you're driven by a passion to rid the world of poor leadership. And that's why you react as you do when someone tells you about an instance that they've experienced of poor leadership or of abusive leadership.
Yeah. And I'm just going to quickly jump on, like I said, I'm not all that great at, there we go, the technology side. Look, I may as well, we're talking about, a mission of eradicating poor leadership being the behavior, not the person. We believe we do, the best way to do that is through free leadership development, which we have a free leadership development program, faith-based leadership development program. Follow the link, take a snap of that, and go and check that out. Absolutely free. Go and check it out, because we believe that is the way for us to be able to move forward as leaders in our mission to eradicate poor leadership. Transition. Let's do a transition. So, talking about, once again, our good old mate Patrick Bet David, right? Yes, we talk a lot about his stuff because I consume a lot of his stuff. I believe he has great content, great businessman, has great leadership. He recently did an interview with these authors from the Blue Ocean Strategy. I don't know if you know the Blue Ocean Strategy, but the Blue Ocean Strategy pretty much, says that there's blue ocean and there's red ocean. The red ocean is where all the sharks are feeding at the moment, and they're all, having a feeding frenzy and everything like that. And the whole point of this is that that's then red because that's where all the sharks are feeding frenzy, and so there's blood in the water, right? So that's where it's. You don't want to swim in the red ocean, right? You want to find blue ocean where it's clear, there's nothing else out there, and that's their theory in business is trying to find the blue ocean of where there's some space in your industry, kind of like specializing in a niche that's unique, like we teach all our businesses all the time that how to do that is find a niche and identify your unique selling proposition and how you can differentiate yourself from the market and swim in blue ocean rather than red ocean. So Patrick Bet David interviewed the authors of that book, and I actually go and check it out. As we always as we always talk about, the links are in description, so go and check them out. It's actually a pretty good interview because they start talking about ESG, this ESG score, right? And it's this new wave, which I've been trying to find an excuse to speak to Dr. Rod about this with his governance experience and wisdom. But I actually thought, on a side note, watch this interview because you can tell Patrick doesn't actually agree with a lot of the things that they say, and his response to them, very mature, very encouraging, very supportive, but kind of emphasized that he didn't agree, but he didn't fight them on it. I think that's going in line with our theme about the leadership fight is the fight doesn't have to be nasty. You don't have to get into name calling or yelling and screaming. And I think there's a very reasonable and mature way of fighting against something that you don't believe in. Now, that being said, what they're talking about is ESG. And ESG is now kind of this next battle that business owners and business leaders, the big corporations, are facing, but smaller and smaller businesses are soon going to have to going to be impacted by this. First of all, Dr. Rod, what is ESG?
Well, it's 3 letters. They talk about equity. The S can mean different things to different people. For some, it's social objectives. For others, it's sustainability in one guise or another. And G is governance.
Yeah.
So it really is about broadening the focus of businesses to encompass not only the bottom line that we call profit, but some other bottom lines as well that involve social objectives and environmental objectives in particular. Did I say E was for equity? It's environmental, social, and normally it's environmental, social, and governance. Sorry,
because
it depends a bit on who you read and who you listen to.
But that's in the DEI is the
DEI.
equity.
DEI is diversity, inclusion, and
diversity,
inclusion, and equity. Yeah.
DIE. Okay. Yes.
Well, they don't call it DIE.
No.
Although, ironically, I think maybe that is a bit prophetic. They call it DEI.
Okay, makes sense.
Anyway,
yes.
That just shows my bias there. But the point behind it, it's quite a good one. Look, the very, very strong focus on profit is a fairly recent phenomenon. It really emerged about the middle of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And it was prompted by economic analysis, which essentially said that the overall welfare of a society is best addressed by business when it maximises its profit, when it makes as much profit as it possibly can. And there are other institutions like government and the family and the local community and so on that are better equipped to address, say, the social side of things. But prior to the 1950s, there's quite a debate within the management literature about what were the proper objectives of business, and it was generally agreed that it wasn't just profit. There were other things that mattered as well, particularly in the social arena. And the environmental stuff really didn't come to the fore probably until the early 1980s.
Because the other thing that I remember learning when I studied governance at university was CSR, corporate social responsibility. How long has that been around for?
Well, that really became, I guess, popularised in the early 1980s and then into the 21st century. A lot of businesses have actually set up CSR divisions or a CSR executive within their structures. A corporate social responsibility was built around the idea that a business, particularly a public company with limited liability and certain legal protections, actually has what we call a social license to operate. And therefore, it has a responsibility not just to make a profit for the shareholders, but also to contribute positively to society in general, the neighbourhood in which the firm operates, the nation, and that would include things like caring for the environment. And look, I don't think there'd be too many people who would disagree with that.
Is this ESG now just kind of an evolution of that CSR?
Well, ESG plus DEI, I guess, are the evolution of CSR. And I think the point that Bette Davis was making was that the pendulum has swung too far.
Yes.
And that businesses are really being forced to sacrifice a good deal of profit, maybe even go out of business, because of the pressure that comes upon them to address issues other than profit. Some of the very large investment firms like BlackRock, Vanguard and a few others, they own so many shares in many companies that they're able to influence board decisions. And the consequences for them of an individual firm losing profitability because it's adopting these policies, that's relatively small, but it can have a massive effect on the individual business in which these organisations invest. In Australia, we have very large, what we call superannuation funds that are effectively managed by unions, and that ends up giving the unions a significant influence on the boards of public companies. And the unions themselves don't necessarily have a strong interest in profit, and they can drive boards to make decisions that ultimately are not good for those businesses. And I think that's the issue that Bette Davis was raising here. It's gone too far.
Yeah, because it seems like it's sorry for the gross metaphor, but it seems incestuous a little bit, because it's sort of like what they're saying is it's these investment companies or investment firms that are saying, no, you must have a good ESG score. And then it's this other company that then trains these companies how to do ESG scores, but those companies are owned by those investment companies. And at the moment, it seems like this ESG score only seems to be just churning money in this kind of upper echelon.
Oh, look, there's that as well. I mean, that all happened with CSR too. The big advisory firms and so on, they see some blue ocean and they get involved. And then, of course, if you can get governments to legislate, that creates a captive market. And so what's happened is it's all become very, very political, and it has been caught up in these modern critical race theory approaches and so on that are a modern variation on Marxism.
Yes.
So we create groups of people who are oppressed and groups of people who are oppressors, and we want to get representation of the oppressed on the boards and all sorts of things. And I don't think that's how it's all meant to work, frankly.
Yeah, so let's delve into that a little bit more, because we're talking about ESG at the core of it, and like DEI and stuff like that. At the core, they're saying that there has to be the equal number of people employed, and we need to be ticking all the boxes of that we're addressing all the minorities and all that sort of stuff, which then curtails away from the idea that me as a business owner, me as a business leader, I should be hiring the best person for the job. Now it's not choosing the best person for the job. It's now choosing, well, now I've got to choose one of each color, literally kind of thing, to then meet my quotas, not necessarily needing an actual outcome.
Look, yeah, it's a very blunt instrument to to obtain desired social outcomes. Because, ultimately, if it goes much too far, it's going to impair society's capacity to meet the needs and the desires of its members, because it's just going to make it impossible for businesses to become profitable. Now, I think because I deal with numbers a fair bit, it's particularly problematic for smaller institutions.
Yes.
You see, human beings can't be divided. You can't employ half a human being. So, if you've somehow got to demonstrate that, say, your workforce or your board is representative on the basis of ethnicity, gender, or whatever, if you're small, it's going to be extremely difficult to do, because human beings themselves are indivisible.
And you may only be hiring 2 staff members.
Well, that's right. And now, and what you would expect to observe within very large firms, proportions in employment that roughly coincide with proportions in the population overall. Yes. Boards are a different matter, because boards would seldom have more than 12 to 15 people on them, and most boards are going to be smaller than that. Yeah. So it's pretty hard to meet those quotas in any case.
So most people watching this would be leaders of small businesses or small small organizations, or they may be politicians, or whatever arena they're in, maybe not in that big corporate space that we were talking about. How does this, I know it's only really affecting the big ones, as far as investment at the moment. However, what should are there warning signs? Is it coming for us? When should we expect, as small business owners, this be affecting us?
Look, I think that's where things are headed. There's no doubt about that. So, let's say in the context of Australia, public companies, including charities, which are public companies limited by guarantee and are not for profit, it is likely that there will be expectations, at least if not regulations, that require boards to, have representation, not just on the basis of gender or race. I was at some board training yesterday on disability inclusion.
Yes.
And I think one of the issues here is that people think there's got to be representation from across the board on say, boards or in terms of employment. But a board can be aware of and well educated about many, many different issues without necessarily having representation on the board. And indeed it has to, because most boards are not big enough to cover all areas, and so they need to seek expert input. Now, look, in relation to things like gender, I would argue that you're mad if you don't have both men and women on your board, agree. Because God didn't make us exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And my observation over many, many years is that we end up with better decisions when both men and women are making those decisions. Now, so forget about quotas. I don't like quotas. We had a discussion about using race as a basis for entry into universities just last week. And I know I surprised you a little bit when I said, in my own experience as an academic, there is a place, for reserving some places within universities for people who, for one reason or another, are disadvantaged. Now, I did also make the point, of course, that race is a very rough and ready shorthand way of encapsulating a whole range of disadvantage, and that my preference is not to do it based on race, but on the disadvantages.
Yes.
And we've got to be so careful we don't put people into categories, because it makes it difficult for them then to get out of those categories. And of course, Tucker Carlson, in that interview that we were talking about a little earlier, he addresses this issue, I think, in a very wise manner, and would recommend that those who are watching this podcast actually go and watch that interview in full, because I think he showed a lot of wisdom in this area, as in many others. So I don't know how clear I'm making myself, but I'm wary of any regulation, requirement that stipulates specific proportions of representation on any basis. I have no issue with advocacy. It concerns me that, say, a bank places a high weighting on an ESG score, which is motivated primarily by political reasons in the first place, because I think ultimately that bank's own profitability is likely to suffer, and therefore so too will the shareholders. And you've got to remember, a lot of the shareholders in banks and other financial institutions, and indeed in companies generally, they're just mums, what we call mums and dads.
Yes.
They're not wealthy people. They're saving for their retirement, or they're saving for the education of their children, or they're saving to buy a house of their own, or whatever. And one of the negative effects of these kinds of approaches is, as profitability is reduced generally throughout the economy, people who are trying to get by without relying on government handouts are going to find it harder and harder.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and it is a fight. Like we as business leaders need to be aware that this is coming, but we shouldn't be afraid of it. And like Dr. Rod shared, is we shouldn't just be focused on the ESG score or DEI as a quota, but there is wisdom as leaders to make sure that we have some diversity. We shouldn't just be surrounded by a bunch of yes men. We shouldn't be surrounded by a bunch of people that are identical to us, because if they're identical to us, that we're not going to grow. We're not going to learn anything. We're not going to find new ways or new things to do. So make sure as you're doing something, no matter how big or small your business is, try to surround yourself with different voices, different types of people from different perspectives, people that can see things differently than you, people with different skill sets, different experiences, so that you can actually learn and grow and be able to see the maximum opportunities rather than having your blinkers on and being blinded to opportunities that are around you. Now, Dr. Rod, you mentioned banks. Let's just, this is a strange story, but it's scary. It's kind of scary, and it makes us realize how real this stuff actually is. Banks are closing the accounts of Christians. Why? Well, there was this article in Premier Christianity that actually Dr. Rod found and shared with me, that there was a charity, Christian charity in Northern Ireland that had its bank accounts shut. There was also, let me find his name.
That would be the Reverend Fothergill.
Fothergill.
That's
Fothergill,
correct.
that's
Richard
it.
Fothergill. Yep.
Reverend Fothergill. They both had their accounts closed because, not just because they were Christian, right? So don't think that, they're going around just closing random Christians' accounts. No, it wasn't exactly like that, but it was because they actually stood up to the banks. We spoke about before about standing up for what you believe God's called you to stand up for. And both of these people spoke out against the banks for their support and promotion of the LGBT rights or communities or Pride Month or whatever it may have been, something to do with that. And they spoke out their minds, shared what they thought about it, and the banks closed their accounts. Now there were some. The charity won a £20,000 lawsuit or whatever against them or whatever, but part of me, Dr. Rod, part of me goes, well, what do you expect? If you're gonna speak out against the bank, that that's because they had a pride flag on their email or something like that, it's like, who's that really hurting? I get their point. Like they're saying that, well, a bank should be non-binary, I suppose you could say. A bank should be not emotional and not trying to promote lifestyles, but just focus on the basics of money, So I kind of get that, but well, what do you expect when you go to fight against a bank? They're just going to shut you down. Like, I don't know. What's your thoughts on this situation and the approach?
Look, I really find this quite difficult because I'm a strong believer in freedom, and I kind of sympathise with the banks in a way that they should be able to choose who will and will not be their customers.
Yes.
But I sympathise with the customers as well because we have every right to stick up for what we believe in.
Yes.
And if a bank decides, or any other business for that matter, decides that it's going to campaign on something which is political, and I'm talking here small p political, such as Pride Month, they must expect that not all of their customers are going to agree. And I think the mature thing to do is to accept dissent.
Yep.
I've never been afraid of dissent. As a manager, as a director, as a chair of board, I've never been afraid of dissent. And one reason is that, and this relates, I suppose, to my understanding of the philosophy of science, one of the ways in which human society has made progress is because dissenters have eventually caused us to think about the status quo and in many cases change it.
Yes.
Now, we shouldn't shut down dissenters. So where a Christian charity or an individual dissents from the political line taken by an organisation, I don't think they should be shut down. Now, ideally, there'd be another bank somewhere that championed something other than Pride, and they'd be able to happily trot off and open an account at that bank. That's how a competitive market would behave. But financial markets are very heavily regulated, and it's not so easy to walk down the street to another bank and say, I'll open an account with you. And I think that's where it gets very, very complicated indeed. So I do believe that... Sorry, you go. No, that's okay, you go. I do believe that a bank should be free to choose who will be its customers.
Yes.
But the problem arises when customers exercise their freedom to make statements in opposition of a position that a bank has taken. If they are what we call that debanking, what if you end up like Nigel Farage, who gets his accounts closed by his bank, approaches 5 other banks, and they all say, no, thanks, we don't want your accounts.
Yes.
And he reports that 5 of his family members have had the same experience.
Yeah.
Because his political views and his political activity is not necessarily appreciated by everybody. That worries me a lot. That really does worry me a lot. I don't know what the answer is.
Because like you say that, let's talk about the one bank. That bank has every right to say who it doesn't serve. Like it's not a public service. It's a private organization, and they can choose, just like, and they refer in this article to the bakery that was that refused to do the gay cake and all that sort of stuff. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't you can't fight one side and then be upset when someone does the same thing to you, right? Because the bakery has every right to refuse who it does business with, and so does the bank. And so I think that they have every right to the charity and everything. They have every right to complain to their bank and say, "Hey, I'm a customer. I'm unhappy with what you're doing because of this." But they also should expect that that if the bank doesn't then want to do business with them, then that's, it's not like they shut them down and they lost their money or anything like that. They just warned them that they were going to close their account. So you've got time to move your money out elsewhere. And so I don't see a problem with that.
But the real
However,
problem arises when
yes.
somebody gets shut out of the market altogether.
Yes, that's
wrong. That shouldn't be happening.
How do you? That's my question to you: is how do we? Because there's nothing wrong with a bank doing that, but when it's 5 banks in a row, it's like, okay, that's a problem. But hold on a second. If it's okay for one bank to do it individually, like how do you then decipher that then the 5th bank? Well, you now no longer have rights to refuse service to someone like everyone else has the right to. You're forced to do it. Let's say it's bakeries, right? There's 5 Christian bakeries and they get refused from every single one of them. And the 5th one, oh, well, now you have to be served.
No, look, I don't think you can do it that way either. And this is a real conundrum. I think because banking is such a basic service, in a modern economy, we really cannot get by without a bank. These days, of course, not every business will accept cash, and in most countries, although the national currency is legal tender, generally speaking, the law doesn't force anybody to accept the currency. They can say, look, we're only going to accept electronic transactions. Yeah. If you've got no relationship with the bank, you won't be able to engage in those transactions. Mm-hmm. And that raises a whole lot of other issues.
Yes.
So in the ideal world, of course, as I say, you'd just be able to walk down the road and go to a bank that doesn't care what you think about Pride Month or may even agree with you. But we don't have that. And it's a conundrum. I think it's very difficult to resolve. And I don't know that governments are well equipped to resolve those sorts of issues, particularly given that they're often driven by ideology in any case. I don't know that there is an easy solution. In my heart of hearts, I think, well, let's go and start a bank. Mm-hmm. But then it may be that because of the views that you have, you won't be able to go through all the regulatory hoops or whatever. I know that, I choose to bank with a small bank. There's a takeover offer on the table from a large bank, which is being vetted by our competition regulator. Now, if that goes through, I'm going to withdraw my accounts because I don't like big banks.
Yeah.
And I left big banking 30 years ago, and I don't want to go back that. So I'm looking at taking my accounts to to a small bank, which almost they're not going to be as activist. By their nature, they tend not to be as activist. So I'll probably have an option here, but it's really difficult for someone like Nigel Farage, who, as a report, the bank wrote to him, said they're giving notice that they'll close his accounts, goes off to 5 other banks. They all say, no, we don't want your business. So what's he going to do? He hasn't really got an option. I think that's pretty tough.
But what is that? But that's what I'm saying. Like, each bank has the right to refuse service to someone. At what point is it no longer someone's right to refuse service? And now,
look, the system isn't working when any customer cannot open an account anywhere. I mean, it's also not working when someone who owns coal mines can't get a bank loan from any bank. On the grounds that, well, you contribute to anthropogenic global warming, so we're not going to lend to you. So thousands of people go without a job. Thousands of poor people in developing countries don't have access to cheap electricity. what tends to happen in our society today is we don't weigh up the benefits and costs.
Yes.
We don't count the costs in terms of human flourishing, which I believe we should.
Yes.
Human flourishing demands that people have access to banking services, for example. Human flourishing demands that some people have access to cheap power generated by thermal power stations.
Yes.
It's crazy.
God gave us the fossil fuels to use.
Well, we could get into a long discussion about that, and it's an important discussion and one we must have as Christians, because for too long, Christians have really kind of skirted around the whole issue of our relationship to the rest of God's creation, despite what it says in Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And maybe this is something we should do one of these days.
Let's do that.
People are talking about it now, but it probably wasn't really until the mid-1960s that the Christian world started to wake up to environmental issues.
Yeah.
So we came to them a little bit late. And now, unfortunately, I think in some church circles, we've embraced a kind of theology of environment, which is not that helpful. It's not helpful to human flourishing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a big and difficult area. There's no doubt about that, and we have to wrestle with it as leaders in the church, as Christian leaders in business. We do have to wrestle with it.
It's difficult. It's difficult because there's no summary to this conversation, because it's a conundrum. It's a juxtaposition. Everyone has the right should have the right to refuse service to whoever they choose to, and we should refuse doing business with whoever we like. That's fine. It's up to us. But there is a point where it is starting to become less and less viable for certain with people with different views. But you know what? I think that's where the doom and gloom is take it too far. So like, all banks are now gonna ban Christian accounts. Okay. So let's look at what's happened in media. Facebook, we've spoken about it. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all censored way too much, right? And for misinformation, everything like that. So what happened? Rumble started it up. Truth Social started it up. Telegram and Signal, I think it was, started up because WhatsApp was and Facebook were too restrictive and taking too much information, and Elon bought Twitter, and we talk about this like, oh no, what, the world's going to be taken over by this particular thing. Yes, but the great thing about commerce, about capitalism is the blue ocean strategy. If that's all going to be restricted, if all the banks are restricting us, there will be another way. Well, I mean, there's cryptocurrencies now and everything like that I feel like we as Christians shouldn't be too afraid of this sort of stuff. Be aware. We need to be aware of it and make our plans and make adjustments. I mean, when we built our app, yes, link down in the description, shameless plug again. When we built our app, I made sure I built it on a platform that wasn't controlled by one of these big organizations. I built it on a way that I could maneuver it around. I've got it shared out. So if it's deleted off by one of these companies or whatever, I've still got it. And that we wanted to have our own app because we wanted to be in control and not actually be under the control of, there's market opportunities. That's the great thing. That's what we should be excited about. Okay. So banks are closing down Christian accounts. Great. Opportunity for Christians to start a bank or whatever, as Dr. Rod said, right? Like there are more opportunities. So we shouldn't be afraid of this stuff. We should be wary and we should be prepared, but we shouldn't be afraid. And talking about being wary and being prepared, let's shift across to our leadership lessons from Luke, the last segment for the day. Looking through this on this story about being in fight, the leadership fight, right? We spoke about Musk and Zuck's fighting, both literally and metaphorically. Tucker, saying how we as leaders need to control how we speak how we use our language in a fight. The fight against this ESG stuff that's coming, the fight against banks and everything like that. Well, what does Jesus have to say about the fight that we have? I want to go to Luke 22 from verse 7 through to 38. No, I'm not going to read it all. I'm not. Just today, I'm not going to read it all. It's such a long one. But the title is The Last Supper. And Jesus is sitting down talking to his disciples. But I think that at the end of it, the last few verses, I think really speak to us, our call as Christians in a fight. Then Jesus asked them, when I sent you out, this is from verse 35, then Jesus asked them, when I sent you out without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? No, nothing, they answered. He said to them, but now, if you have a purse, take it. We're talking about money like being locked up by the banks. Well, have you got your money? Have you built up a nest egg? Are you protected? Like that's the key. Like we need to take a purse, right? Like make sure you have your funds. Be smart with your money and prepare financially for the long run. If you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. So the sword is a weapon. Like, what is it that you're going to use to fight your battle? Well, you should invest in that thing. It is written, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. The disciples said, see, Lord, here are 2 swords. That is enough, he said. God bless the disciples. Here, Lord, here's 2. He's probably thinking to himself, I'm not talking about that, but okay, that'll do. That'll do. Watched Shrek the other day. It kind of like it errs signs of that'll do, donkey. That'll do. Dr. Rod, Jesus is just calling us to be prepared. Be prepared financially and be prepared practically with a weapon to be able to fight. Invest in what it is that we're going to be fighting. How do you take Jesus' instructions for battle?
Well, I think it boils down to being prepared. Mm-hmm. So have knowledge, obviously have knowledge of his word and understand what we're battling against. Mm-hmm. We're battling against things that are happening in the spiritual realm.
Yes.
We're battling against powers and principalities, as Paul says in Ephesians. Mm. So the sword is principally, of course, the Bible.
Yes.
The word of God. That's our primary weapon. And we actually give effect to the power in the Bible primarily through prayer.
Yeah.
Because prayer changes things. And so, look, Jesus spoke in parables all the time. And the disciples didn't always understand what he had to say. And nor do we, frankly. Mm-hmm. It can take years and years of study of the Word of God to really figure out what
and there's still commentators that interpret it, and they interpret it differently.
Yep. And rarely we will have to literally take up a sword,
yes,
to defend ourselves or our families. But most of the time, our battle isn't against individuals. It's not against the people, because God wants the people to come into a saving relationship with him through their confession of Jesus Christ as Lord and Saviour, and their belief that God raised him from the dead, and that's where God's heart is. So, and of course, the whole point about the Last Supper was that he instituted a ritual by which we were to remember what he achieved when he went to the cross.
Yeah.
His broken body brings healing, not only to our bodies, but also to our minds. When that crown of thorns was placed on his head, those thorns would have pierced his physical brain, causing absolutely unbelievably excruciating pain. So he made provision for healing of our minds as well as our bodies. But when his blood was shed, that's what ushered in the new covenant. So we're not kind of fighting the battles like, say, King David did when he was battling against people.
Yeah.
We're actually battling against spiritual forces that mostly we don't see unless God gives us particular discernment to see them. And I was talking with someone yesterday, a business guy. We were talking about angels and demons and sharing our experiences of both.
Yes.
Either seeing them or sensing them, and they're real. They're biblical. And that is just a little window, of course, into what goes on in the spiritual realm. Most of it we don't actually see at all.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that Jesus said to them, when I sent you without money bag, knapsack or sandals, did you lack anything? They say no. And then he says, well, now, if you have a money bag, take it.
Yeah.
So this is really, he's imploring them, you've got to be a bit adaptable. As the situation changes, you've got to adapt to the changing situation. We had to adapt to the new covenant. So we had, and his whole ministry was to Israel to try to convince people we're going to transition from the old covenant to a new covenant, what Paul calls a better covenant, because it's a covenant governed by the grace of God, not by the law that he gave to Moses.
Yeah.
His rejection was essentially what opened up the window for the Gentiles. Although I notice that way back even in the Psalms, David issues a call to the Gentiles to come to the Lord, to honour the Lord, to love the Lord. So that call was always available, of course, always available. But obviously there's a kind of window or a dispensation for the Gentiles that we're experiencing now, and actually since the resurrection of Jesus. Actually since Acts chapter 10.
Yeah. Well, I think that I kind of going back to the point of him saying, I sent you out without your purse, and then now I'm sending you out with the purse. I kind of see that as another example of how Jesus did never heal the same way. Because I think that he did, even when he healed that blind man, one he put his hands on, the other time he spat in dirt and put it in his eye. It wasn't ever an exact same way. I kind of feel like it's fighting against that religious spirit of ourselves to try to follow the process and God told me to go out without money, so I'm going to, because could you imagine the amount of pastors that would be going out and trying to plant churches with no money, although there are many, that would go, well, Jesus said to just go out without any money. It's like, well, actually, no, he didn't. He didn't just say that. He said that one time, and then another time he said, go out with money, right?
Well, look, there were churches that built a doctrine around that, and this is in the 1980s, late 1970s and into the 1980s. They'd do that. They'd send teams of their people out without any money.
Really?
You just go out for 3 months or 6 weeks or whatever, and you evangelize and God will provide. A lot of people were badly hurt by that. Mm-hmm. And I think this is not our topic, but you've really got to read Scripture in the context of the whole counsel of the Word of God.
Yes. Yes.
You can't build a doctrine or a program on the basis of a scrap of scripture, because you'll probably get it wrong.
Yes. Yes, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So I suppose, like, how do we fight as Christians? Well, Jesus is telling us, be prepared. Be prepared. Be prepared financially. Like sometimes, yes, God calls us to go out and do things with our money, and He will provide for us. But I think wisdom prevails in most cases. The book is a wisdom book, right? Like God talks about godly wisdom plenty in here. That a lot of the time you going out without being financially prepared. He talks about when you build a house, you got to count the cost. He talks about that all the time. So be prepared financially. Be prepared financially, but be prepared practically with the sword. Yes, be prepared with the word. Read this, get into it, know it. Like right now, I'm going through my own battles at the moment, and I'm just so deep in the word of like every day I'm like, what does God have to say about my situation? It's in here. And then we know that we're practically prepared for that fight. Whether that be training, whether that be, get yourself some knowledge, get yourself a qualification, get yourself whatever, get yourself experience, start yourself a YouTube channel, start yourself a whatever that thing is that you believe that it is that God has for you to be able to fight your battle. Go and get it, right? And as the disciples did, they got 2, right? So my encouragement to you is be prepared. Be prepared for the battle. It is coming. It is coming. Don't be blindsided. We've spoken about ESG scores and banks shutting down. Like, be prepared. That stuff is coming. Don't be afraid of it, but be prepared. And we spoke about Zucks and Musk fighting. Having their spat, their feud. Let's be prepared so that we can actually be on the forefront of the changes that are happening in our industry and be at the forefront of being vocal. This is a practical thing. Do marketing. If you're in business and not doing any marketing, and my business is doing well, yeah, but in one moment you could lose all of your customers like that. So you need another stream. You need to be prepared. You can't just decide to do marketing when you need new customers, because it's too late then. And so that's just a little bit of a side note tip for you. Dr. Rod, thank you so much for hanging with us today and sharing your wisdom.
As always, I've enjoyed it, and I've learned something too as we've conversed, and I certainly hope that we've given some people something to think about and some hints that they might be able to implement to improve their leadership.
Agreed. And so thank you for watching. And as Dr. Rod said, if you got anything from this, right, hopefully it has spoken to you. Give it a thumbs up. It helps the algorithm stuff. You put a comment below. That helps the algorithm even more. Comment something, just say hi, whatever. Or, you know what, if you want to see more of this content, we do this every week. There's a whole bunch of other faith-based leadership development content on our channel. Hey, we'd be honored if you would subscribe and join our community. But thank you once again, and I hope that you have an absolutely blessed week, and hope that you learn, live, and lead on purpose. Dr. Rod, see you next week.
Looking forward to it.